Technically, Earth is a Class 13 Deathworld. Maybe 14. A short story by user Crystal Column. Marcus, civilian consultant for a company specialized in terraforming, construction of habitats, biospheres, and life support systems. Currently sitting in a conference room where his team was supposed to be hashing out the final stages of its development. He looked over at his boss, and the honestly insane number of restrictions and specifications listed on the board they were going over. He was going to speak, but decided better to not. The Ilthrax looked stressed enough with the listed designs, and Marcus didn't want to make it worse for them. Marcus had been working with this particular company for a few years now as their civilian consultant. He worked on more than a dozen biospheres, nature habitats, and other terraforming projects. Exactly why they kept him on staff has long become one of the many questions he'd find himself asking on a nearly daily basis. The last time they'd asked him to weigh in on anything significant or on an important aspect of a project was during the construction of a Class 7 biosphere meant primarily for human occupation. But since then, the most they'd asked of him was in relation to whether or not a non-sapient species they'd planned to introduce was cute, and the potential ramifications thereof. He wasn't complaining, honestly. It's a cushy job and pays well. He doesn't need to do much, and for as rare as the calls for his expertise are, they do seem to genuinely consider his input. Today they are working on something special. A Class 10 biosphere was being built to be used as a military training field. A rather exciting and nerve-wracking project for most of his colleagues, but honestly he felt their designs were a bit too... The weather would be varied for sure, but even the fastest wind setting was only set to 50 units per second, approximately 45 miles per hour. No worse than kite-flying weather in his opinion, unless they included hail into the mix, which of course they did not. Light rain would be the worst, and at exact specified intervals for that matter. The ground would quake occasionally, but again the setting was so low that the most it would do is knock some things off tables or cause mild disorientation at worst. The artificial gravity was set to 1.33 that of galactic standard, approximately 8.1 meters per second squared, close to the very lowest of what is classified as high gravity at 1.3 or 8 meters per second squared. Approximately 1.33 was the highest the Ilthrax were willing to endure, even if it was for training meant to increase their chances of survival when stranded on a potentially high-gravity world. The temperature was set to range from negative 10 degrees Celsius for 1/10 of a cycle to 35 and 40 Celsius to the other 2/10 of a cycle, which was basically the same as living in Washington State. And the predators they planned to use for populating it were, well, for lack of a better word, cute. For some, you wouldn't want to find yourself naked and unarmed in their hunting grounds, but even just casually clothed and holding a good sturdy stick or rock, he'd call the encounter at worst equivalent to wrestling with a slightly large angry cat. Exactly why the Ilthrax considered them legit threats was honestly very confusing, and considering the Ilthrax's large scythe-like underarms and their jaws being capable of chewing through tree bark like carrots. Also, the fact they were armed to the mandible with plasma rifles and taser weaponry. After watching the leader of this project lower the artificial gravity setting again for the 5th time since they'd started the meeting, Marcus finally couldn't hold back. This biosphere was being built for survival training, and as far as he was concerned, the current designs not only barely qualified as Class 10, but even Class 9 was starting to look to be more deadly than what they were building. Marcus said, "Lead engineer Dijkstrish, I would like to make a few suggestions." Dijkstrish jerked one of their compound eyes towards Marcus and looked as if they were holding back one of their scythes from lashing out at his sudden audible presence. The stress from the project clearly was getting to Dijkstrish, but they had been up close and personal with the environment on far more occasions than they'd liked, and had almost been jumped by one of those big cats when it was being reviewed as a potential threat for populating the biosphere. Dijkstrish replied, "You may speak." "I would like to suggest at least 2 more additional predators be added to the ecosystem, and that you introduce at least 2 more omnivore species, with at least one being capable of flight. The system, as it stands, is barely qualified to be considered a Class 10 as it is. The wildlife the soldiers would meet on a real Deathworld would be far deadlier than this. Likely would be far deadlier than any you've introduced so far. Also, the weather needs altering as well. As it stands, the wind and rain will only pose minor danger due to wind chill, but you've set it as such that the winds will die out before the cold season and be at their height during the dry season, which would only make the heat more tolerable, thus removing the point of the training grounds in that regard. If this is to be used as a military training facility, soldiers need to face a true Class 10 environment. I personally would consider that what we've built a Class 9 at its worst, a Class 8 at its best. Also,
I do not think that you qualify to dictate to me what a Class 8 environment entails, Civil Consultant Mercus. I have designed countless biospheres and station life supports, and I believe I am well equipped to tell when an ecosystem is or is not dangerous to its inhabitants. I will consider your suggestions, but I believe my designs to be optimal for their intended purpose.
Marcus replied, I do not question your qualifications nor your familiarity with Class 9 and below ecosystems, but I believe I am more qualified to speak on Class 10 and above. You know the world my species came from. As the design stands, it would be easier to send the troops to one of the many wildlife reserves on my homeworld, as what you've built resembles one I frequent to an uncanny degree. Dijkstrish made a gesture with one of his many scythed limbs that Marcus knew to be a gesture similar to him giving the finger, before scuttling out of the conference room, clearly unwilling to listen to him any further. Lead biologist Jewel began making sounds akin to that of drawing nails across a chalkboard, which Marcus knew as her race's equivalent of laughter. Jewel said, Do not mind Dijkstrish. He is salty over the incident with the, what did you call it, big cat? Yes, the creature very much resembled a felidae called a bobcat from my homeworld, though with far less teeth. The Ashrata are considered one of the top predators on the Ilthrax homeworld. Also, one of the few things that can coax them into making the ah sound, as it's normally reserved for use in respectful dialect only, Jewel said. It's a big fluffy kitten at worst, and could you believe that guy? Look at this. 1.32 gravity. Does he even realize how low that's considered among Deathworlds? Most don't go below 1.35, and he expects this crap to fly for a military training facility? I pity the trainees that leave this facility. Not much to do if Dijkstrish doesn't agree. Is it true that your homeworld has a valley where temperatures reach over 55 Celsius? You mean Death Valley? Yes. The record currently is actually over 60 Celsius now, and it even goes below -9 Celsius at some points in the cycle. Fascinating. No wonder your homeworld is a Class 12 if temperatures can swing that much each cycle. And is it true your people built cities and zones where winds exceed 170 units per second? Well, actually it swings pretty much all across the globe. And if you're referring to Florida, yeah, we rebuild the place probably once every 10 cycles or so. The people are just too stubborn to give up on the place, even though it's been entirely flooded by rising ocean tides nearly every other decade since as long as we've been there. Unbelievable. I can see why they keep you on the board. Not many of us have even experienced anything close to those conditions on your homeworld, and I can hardly imagine what it's like to not only have your city flood, but also rebuild it, knowing full well it'll just be flooded again. Though I guess that is to be expected from a species which evolved on a Class 12. Technically, that classification's a bit off, but I do appreciate my opinions being considered, for as frequent as they are needed. Jewel again began assaulting Marcus with the shrill sounds of nails on chalkboard. I hardly think your world comes close to that of a Class 11. Given what little I know of it, even just the two qualities you've made clear firmly place it as a Class 12. Well, I wasn't implying Class 11. Technically speaking, Earth would be Class 13 if not for human intervention and our actions in the last 100 cycles. Jewel stopped and brought all three of her optical stalks over to look at Marcus. I'm sure the Corti Directorate knew what they were doing when they classified your world. I'm sure they would have even considered lowering its score if not for the cycle-set hurricanes and constant lightning storms. Well, honestly, they didn't believe us when we told them about Australia, and about the results we found when examining our I-scores. Earth actually goes through a 10,000 cycle set global ice age, which our planet is supposed to currently be in, if not for our overuse of fossil fuels for the century and a half leading up to first contact. The permafrost was supposed to set in about now and stay for another 2,000 cycles before warming again. That and the center of the Americas are located over a continent-sized supervolcano. Our magnetic fields flip entirely every few thousand cycles. Oh, and I'm serious, everything about Australia is true, and then some. They have these spiders, tiny venomous arachnids that let out filaments of silk that can catch the wind when they're first born, and carries them up near the upper atmosphere. There they meet others of them and build vast flying islands of silk. Then they eat a few unlucky birds, themselves and the excess silk, before growing larger and heavier, which causes them to start falling, blanketing sometimes hundreds of units of land in spider-filled silk. Oh, and due to the winds in the upper atmo, they've made their way to nearly every part of the globe at one point or another, sometimes to fall on unsuspecting outdoor events. Honestly, I'd personally classify the planet as a class 14 if for no other reason than that alone. Jewel looked at the human with abject terror. She'd known Earth was a class 12, and she knew the basics for that classification. But what she was hearing here was beyond any reason, beyond deadly. It took her a few seconds to compose herself before something else Marcus said caused her renewed and even deeper horror. Wait, Australia is real? Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. I am the Casual Deathworlder, your host, and this has been, technically, Earth is a Class 13 Deathworld, maybe 14, a short story by user Crystal Column. I hope you enjoyed listening to it as much as I enjoyed making it. If you enjoyed it, please hit that like button, leave a comment, maybe share it with your friends. If you'd like to hear more like it, please hit that subscribe button. It always helps. As always, a shout out to my editor, Gregor. I could not do this without you, buddy. This was a fun little story. There's Australia mentioned throughout HFY here and there, but there's almost none of it mentioned in the actual Deathworlders canon, which is kind of sad because it spices things up a little bit. Let's see. Question, who's got the question? How do you like your steaks? Perfect Deathworlder question.
Carnivore. We are hunters and we like our meat raw.
Leave your comments below, and I appreciate all of you, and thank you for all listening. Thank you all for listening. Have a good day. Bye-bye.